Ever bitten into something totally normal, only to find out it's illegal now? In the 1970s, dinner tables were filled with foods that today would spark outrage, health scares, or straight-up arrests. Let's rewind time and uncover banned bites that people casually enjoyed just a few decades ago. Back in the 1960s and 70s, diet sodas were all the rage. Companies were racing to deliver sugar-free drinks that actually tasted good, and one of their secret weapons was cyclamate. Found in brands like Tab and Diet Pepsi, this artificial sweetener was 30 to 50 times sweeter than sugar, meaning just a tiny amount could make a soda taste refreshingly sweet without the calories. It was cheap too, making it a favorite for manufacturers eager to cash in on the booming diet craze. Cyclamate-sweetened drinks were practically a lifestyle. People who wanted to cut calories but still enjoy a fizzy treat stocked their fridges with them. You'd see slim cans of Diet Right or No Cal sitting next to casseroles and TV dinners, ready to be cracked open with a satisfying hiss. It was the go-to drink for weight-conscious Americans, and many swore it tasted better than the saccharin-based alternatives. But by 1969, the party was over. After studies linked cyclamate to bladder cancer in lab rats, the FDA swiftly banned it. The science was debated for years. Many argued the amounts tested were excessive, but the ban stayed. Before pasteurized eggs became the standard, raw eggs were a common ingredient in homemade recipes, especially in rich, creamy dishes like eggnog and mayonnaise. It was just how things were done. Grandma didn't think twice about cracking a fresh egg straight into the blender to whip up a batch of silky mayo or stirring raw yolks into a holiday eggnog that packed as much punch as the bourbon inside it. It was tradition, and nobody questioned it until they had to. By the late 20th century, food safety experts started raising alarms about the growing risk of salmonella contamination. Unlike today's commercially pasteurized eggs, the ones sitting in a 1970s fridge came straight from the farm, sometimes with a little extra nature still on the shell. A contaminated egg here and there wasn't enough to stop the show, until outbreaks became harder to ignore. By the 1990s, regulations tightened, and pasteurized eggs became the safer choice. Despite the risks, plenty of old-school cooks still swear by the taste and texture of raw egg mayo and eggnog. Some argue pasteurization dulls the flavor, while others simply miss the thrill of living on the edge. Bright red candies, cherry-flavored snacks, and even some holiday treats in the 1970s owed their bold color to a single ingredient: red dye number 2. It was everywhere, from gumballs to cake frostings, giving sweets that signature vibrant hue that made them impossible to resist. At the time, artificial dyes were a standard part of food production, helping manufacturers make their products more visually appealing. After all, who wanted a dull pink candy when you could have a deep, fiery red one? The problem? Red dye. Number 2 wasn't as harmless as it looked. By the mid-1970s, scientific studies linked it to potential health risks, including concerns over carcinogenic effects. When Soviet researchers published findings suggesting a connection to cancer in lab rats, the US had no choice but to take a second look. Public concern mounted, and in 1976, the FDA banned the dye, triggering a nationwide panic. Some candy makers scrambled to find alternatives, while others simply pulled their red products from shelves altogether, resulting in the infamous disappearance of red M&Ms, even though they didn't actually contain the dye. Today, red dye number 2 is a thing of the past, but artificial food colorings are still debated. In the Midwest, especially around Wisconsin, there was a holiday tradition that might make modern food safety inspectors break into a cold sweat. Raw ground beef served on rye bread, often topped with onions and a dash of salt and pepper. Known as cannibal sandwiches, this dish wasn't some underground delicacy. It was a staple at family gatherings, particularly around Christmas, when butchers sold the freshest beef and people trusted their local meat markets to provide high-quality, bacteria-free cuts. Eating raw meat might sound risky today, but for decades, it was considered perfectly normal in certain communities. The preparation was simple: freshly ground beef, preferably from a trusted butcher, was spread onto slices of rye bread, sometimes with a smear of butter or mustard. Some enjoyed it with a side of pickles, others with a cold beer. To those who grew up with it, the taste was rich, the texture smooth, and the risk? Barely a thought. That changed as foodborne illnesses became a growing concern. By the late 20th century, increased cases of E. coli and salmonella made raw beef a serious health hazard. For much of the 20th century, canned foods were a kitchen essential. They were cheap, convenient, and had an impressively long shelf life. Whether it was a can of soup, vegetables, or condensed milk, chances were high that the can itself was sealed with lead solder. It seemed like a practical solution at the time. Lead was easy to work with, and it created a strong, airtight seal that kept food from spoiling. But what people didn't realize was that the lead in those seams wasn't just staying on the outside. Over time, especially with acidic foods like tomatoes or fruit, the lead could leach into the food. And unlike a bad ingredient you can taste or smell, lead poisoning happens slowly. Symptoms could take years to appear, affecting the nervous system, brain function, and even childhood development. The real turning point came in the 1970s, when health experts made the undeniable link between lead exposure and serious health risks. By 1991, lead-soldered food cans were completely banned in the U.S., replaced with safer manufacturing methods. While today's cans are lead-free, the lesson stuck. Sometimes the biggest dangers aren't the ones you can see. By the 1970s, margarine had secured its place as the healthier alternative to butter. It was cheaper, lasted longer, and, thanks to trans fats, stayed solid at room temperature while giving baked goods that perfect flakiness. Fast food chains and restaurants took full advantage, using partially hydrogenated oils for frying everything from French fries to fried chicken. The result? Crispy, golden perfection with a long shelf life. But what seemed like a miracle ingredient turned out to be a silent killer. Trans fats raised bad cholesterol, lowered good cholesterol, and increased the risk of heart disease, without people even realizing it. For decades, the food industry brushed off concerns, marketing margarine as a healthier alternative while deep fryers across America sizzled with heart-clogging oils. The science was catching up, though, and by the early 2000s, studies confirmed what researchers had suspected for years. Trans fats were among the worst fats you could consume. Regulations followed, and by 2015, the FDA officially declared trans fats unsafe. Companies scrambled to reformulate products, and today, margarine isn't what it used to be. While fried food never went out of style, the days of trans fat-loaded cooking oils are over. By the 1970s, the diet food industry was booming. With calorie counting in full swing, people were looking for ways to satisfy their sweet tooth without the guilt. Saccharin became the answer. Found in everything from diet sodas to sugar-free desserts, it was a game changer. Hundreds of times sweeter than sugar, yet with none of the calories. It didn't taste exactly like sugar, but for those determined to stay slim, it was close enough. Saccharin had actually been around since the late 1800s, but it wasn't until the mid-20th century that it took over the diet market. People stirred it into their coffee, poured it over cereal, and downed it in soft drinks like Tab. It was everywhere, until scientists started raising concerns. In the early 1970s, studies linked saccharin to bladder cancer in lab rats, setting off alarm bells. The FDA responded by mandating warning labels on products containing the sweetener, effectively scaring off a lot of consumers. Despite the controversy, saccharin never fully disappeared. Later research suggested the rat studies didn't translate directly to humans, and by 2000, the cancer warning was removed. Today, it's still around, though it competes with newer artificial sweeteners. Back then, though, it was the diet craze's best friend. Until it wasn't. In the 1970s, home canning was more than just a hobby. It was a way to stretch the grocery budget and keep the pantry stocked year-round. Families filled their shelves with jars of green beans, corn, and carrots, all preserved with time-tested methods passed down through generations. But while fruits and jams could be safely canned with a boiling water bath, Low-acid vegetables were another story. Without a pressure cooker, those innocent-looking jars could turn into ticking time bombs for botulism. For years, many home canners relied on boiling water alone, believing that if it sealed, it was safe. Some added aspirin or vinegar, thinking it would help ward off bacteria. Others simply trusted the process. After all, their grandparents had done it. The problem? Clostridium botulinum, the bacteria behind botulism, thrives in low oxygen, low-acid environments like improperly canned vegetables. It doesn't change the taste, smell, or appearance of food, making it nearly impossible to detect until symptoms appear. As cases of botulism poisoning mounted, food safety officials began cracking down, emphasizing the need for pressure canning. Canned tuna was cheap, packed with protein, and could be turned into everything from tuna salad sandwiches to casseroles. Families relied on it for quick meals, and no one thought twice about how much they ate. Back then, there were no warning labels, no recommendations to limit consumption, just endless recipes encouraging people to make the most of their pantry supply. But there was a hidden problem. Industrial pollution had been steadily increasing mercury levels in ocean fish, and tuna, being a top predator, was absorbing more than its fair share. By 1970, reports surfaced linking mercury in tuna to potential neurological damage, particularly in pregnant women and young children. The FDA took action, setting limits on mercury levels in fish, but there was no official warning on cans. It wasn't until the early 2000s that the government issued clear guidelines advising consumers, especially expectant mothers, to limit their intake of certain tuna varieties. Despite the concerns, canned tuna never disappeared from store shelves. It's still a go-to meal for millions, but with a little more caution attached. In the 1970s, grabbing a snack off the grocery shelf was simple. No long ingredient lists, no allergy warnings, just food in a package. If a product contained peanuts, dairy, or wheat, it was up to the consumer to figure it out. Those with food allergies had to play detective, carefully reading labels, if they even listed all the ingredients. There were no bold warnings, no may contain statements, and certainly no standardized regulations to prevent cross-contamination. Food manufacturers weren't trying to be careless. The awareness just wasn't there. While allergies existed, they weren't as widely recognized as they are today. A peanut butter factory might also process cookies, but there was no obligation to disclose that. For those with severe allergies, eating processed food could be a game of Russian roulette. One mislabeled snack and a hospital trip wasn't out of the question. The turning point came in the late 1990s and early 2000s when food allergy cases became more widely studied, and advocacy groups pushed for better labeling. In 2004, the Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act was passed, requiring clear identification of the top 8 allergens. A crisp autumn day in the 1970s wasn't complete without a trip to the local farm stand. Fresh apples, homemade pies, and of course, a jug of unpasteurized apple cider, cloudy, rich, and straight from the press. It was a seasonal tradition, the kind of drink you poured into a glass and sipped cold, or warmed up on the stove with a cinnamon stick. No labels, no expiration dates, just fresh-pressed fruit in its purest form. For generations, farm-fresh juices were a staple, especially in rural areas where people trusted their local orchards. The juice was made by simply crushing fruit and collecting the liquid. No heat treatment, no extra processing, and because it wasn't filtered, it had that distinct, pulpy texture that store-bought juice just couldn't match. But as food safety research advanced, so did concerns over harmful bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella. Unpasteurized juice, while natural, carried risks, especially for children and the elderly. By the 1990s, regulations tightened, requiring warning labels and, in many cases, pasteurization for commercial sale. While you can still find raw cider at some farm stands, it often comes with a disclaimer. In the 1970s, lighting up a cigarette at the dinner table wasn't just allowed, it was expected. Restaurants had ashtrays on every table, waiters took orders through a haze of smoke, and no one batted an eye if you alternated bites of steak with puffs of a Marlboro. Whether at home, in a diner, or even on an airplane, Smoking while eating was just part of the culture. Back then, cigarette ads featured doctors, Hollywood icons, and even cartoon camels, reinforcing the idea that smoking wasn't just normal, it was sophisticated. Families would gather around the table, and after a home-cooked meal, someone would light up without a second thought. At fast food joints, parents puffed away while kids unwrapped cheeseburgers. Even in fancy restaurants, a good meal was often finished with a cigarette and a cup of coffee, like some kind of ritual. But as medical studies piled up linking secondhand smoke to serious health risks, the public's tolerance started to shift. The first major bans started in the late 80s, and by the 2000s, smoking in restaurants was virtually extinct. Back in the 1970s, hot dogs were everywhere, at ballparks, backyard cookouts, and school cafeterias. Whether boiled, grilled, or roasted over an open flame, they were an American staple. What few people realized, though, was that those perfectly pink Franks owed their color and long shelf life to a heavy dose of sodium nitrates. These preservatives kept hot dogs looking fresh and safe from bacterial growth, but over time, concerns started sizzling. Nitrates and nitrites were widely used in processed meats, not just for preservation, but also to enhance flavor. The problem? Studies began linking high nitrate consumption to potential cancer risks, particularly due to their conversion into nitrosamines, compounds found to be carcinogenic in lab tests. While no one was dropping their hot dog at the site of a study, health experts started warning against excessive consumption, especially for kids who were already eating them by the dozen. By the late 20th century, regulations tightened, and manufacturers began reducing nitrate levels while introducing uncured options with natural preservatives like celery powder. Today, nitrate-free hot dogs are an alternative, but traditional versions still exist, just with stricter oversight. Mornings in the 1970s often started the same way. Parents sipping their coffee, kids getting ready for school, and, in many households, children drinking coffee right alongside the adults. It wasn't unusual. In fact, in some families it was encouraged, especially in certain cultural traditions where a little coffee with milk and sugar was considered perfectly fine for young ones. Some parents even believed it helped build character or made kids feel more grown up. Coffee for kids wasn't just about the caffeine, it was part of breakfast. Some children dunked their toast into it, while others drank a watered-down version, often loaded with sugar. It wasn't uncommon for grandparents to pour a little into a toddler's bottle, swearing it would keep them calm, an idea that hasn't exactly aged well. But as health studies evolved, concerns over caffeine's effects on developing bodies became harder to ignore. Doctors warned that regular consumption could stunt growth, interfere with sleep, and even lead to increased heart rates. While coffee itself was never banned for kids, the cultural norm slowly faded. Today, it's more likely to raise eyebrows than fill sippy cups. But back then, a cup of Joe before school wasn't shocking. It was just part of growing up, one jittery sip at a time. For much of American history, wild game meat wasn't just for hunters. It was for sale. In rural areas, local butchers and roadside markets offered everything from venison to wild rabbit, often sourced straight from the woods. No USDA inspections, no government oversight, just the trust that if a guy in town sold it, it was good. And for many, it was. Fresh, lean, and often cheaper than store-bought beef, wild game was a practical option, especially when grocery store prices climbed. It was prepared just like any other meat. Venison roasts, rabbit stews, fried squirrel, whatever was available, people knew how to cook it. Some families had a deep knowledge of butchering and preserving, passed down for generations. But the problem wasn't always in how it was cooked, it was what might be lurking in the meat before it ever hit the pan. With no inspections, there was no way to guarantee wild game was free from disease, parasites, or contamination. By the late 20th century, regulations cracked down, requiring all commercially sold meat to go through USDA inspection. While personal hunting remains legal, selling wild game without certification is now largely banned. Holiday parties in the 1970s weren't complete without a giant bowl of homemade eggnog, rich, creamy, and laced with enough booze to keep the festivities going. It was made the old-fashioned way with fresh eggs, heavy cream, sugar, and a generous pour of rum, brandy, or whiskey. And once mixed, it often sat out for hours, left at room temperature for guests to ladle into their cups all evening long. Refrigeration? That was for leftovers. Eggnog had been made this way for centuries, with the belief that alcohol would kill off any harmful bacteria lurking in the raw eggs. And for the most part, people drank it without issue. Families swore by their own special recipes, passing them down like treasured heirlooms. The longer it sat, the better the flavors blended, or at least that was the logic. But as food safety research advanced, experts started warning that alcohol wasn't the magic disinfectant people thought it was. Raw eggs carried the risk of salmonella, and dairy left out too long could turn an indulgent holiday treat into a fast track to food poisoning. By the late 20th century, pasteurized eggs became the safer choice, and most modern eggnog recipes required refrigeration. In the 1970s, grabbing a cold soda meant reaching for a thick glass bottle with bold, colorful branding baked right onto the surface. Those logos and labels weren't just stickers. They were printed directly onto the glass using bright, long-lasting enamel paints. The problem was, many of those paints contained lead, and every sip from the bottle meant a potential exposure to toxic heavy metals. Lead-based paints had been used for decades because they were durable, resisted fading, and made the logos pop. No one thought twice about it. You'd twist off the cap, take a swig, and maybe even collect the empty bottles for a few cents at the local store. Kids played with them, stacked them up, or even used them for makeshift science experiments. But the real science was happening in labs, where researchers began linking lead exposure to serious health risks, especially for children. By the late 20th century, regulations started phasing out lead in household products, including paint, gasoline, and eventually soda bottles. By the early 1990s, U.S. manufacturers had moved to safer alternatives. Today, soda branding is mostly done with paper or plastic labels, but for those who remember the old glass bottles, they were a piece of pop culture, with a little extra toxicity on the side. For much of American history, brewing beer at home was a tradition as old as the country itself. Families crafted their own recipes, adjusting flavors to their liking. But by the early 20th century, Prohibition changed everything. Even after it was repealed in 1933, one strange law remained. While making wine at home was legal, brewing beer was not. That didn't stop people, though. By the 1970s, home brewing was a quiet but thriving underground hobby. People who wanted fresh, custom-made beer often turned to home brewing kits, handed-down recipes, or straight-up improvisation. Fermenting was done in basements, garages, or wherever a bubbling carboy could be tucked away. It wasn't just about cost savings, it was about control. Store-bought beer in the 70s was mostly light, mass-produced lagers. If you wanted something with real character, you had to make it yourself. Legally speaking, though, that homemade brew was contraband. The law didn't exactly make sense, and by the late 1970s, it finally changed. In 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed a bill legalizing home brewing for personal use. That small change set the stage for the craft beer revolution that exploded decades later. Grocery shopping in the 1970s came with a little more mystery than most people realized, especially at the butcher counter. While shoppers expected to get ground beef, hot dogs, or sausage, what they didn't always know was that those meats often contained organ meats like heart, liver, or tongue, blended right in without any clear labeling. It wasn't considered deceptive, it was just how things were done. Waste not, want not. Organ meats had been a staple in traditional cooking for centuries. They were nutrient-dense, packed with iron and vitamins, and most importantly, cheap. For meat processors, using every part of the animal made economic sense. Instead of tossing organ cuts aside, they were mixed into processed meats to add volume and keep costs down. Some people had no issue with it. After all, dishes like liver and onions were common. But others had no idea what they were eating. By the late 20th century, food regulations tightened, and full disclosure became mandatory. Labels had to clearly state what was inside, and consumers got a better understanding of what was actually in their meat. Dinner parties in the 1970s had one dish that seemed to defy logic: the savory Jell-O mold. A wobbly tower of gelatin, often packed with processed meats, canned vegetables, and a suspiciously artificial glow, it was a centerpiece of many tables. Whether it was ham and lime gelatin, chicken suspended in tomato aspic, or a seafood salad encased in lemon-flavored Jell-O, this culinary oddity was both a conversation starter and, for some, a challenge to eat. Jell-O molds had been around for decades, but after World War II, food companies aggressively marketed them as an easy, elegant way to serve meals. Housewives clipped recipes from magazines, creating gelatin-packed creations filled with everything from olives to pimentos. Processed meats like Spam or bologna often found their way into the mix, held together by gelatin and thickened with mayonnaise. It was a product of its time, efficient, visually striking, and heavy on artificial additives like food dyes and stabilizers. As food safety and nutrition research evolved, concerns over processed meats, excessive artificial ingredients, and sodium levels grew. By the 1980s, the popularity of savory gelatin dishes faded. Today, they're more of a retro curiosity than a dinner staple. In the 1970s, canned soup was a kitchen staple. With just a can opener and a pot, you had an instant meal, thick, salty, and packed with flavor. But what made it so addictive? A little ingredient called MSG, monosodium glutamate, was the secret behind that deep, savory taste that made every spoonful feel richer than it actually was. Tomato soup, chicken noodle, cream of mushroom, virtually every variety had a hefty dose of it. MSG had been used in processed foods for decades, praised for enhancing flavor and making even the simplest ingredients taste more complex. Food manufacturers loved it because it masked the blandness of cheap ingredients, creating the illusion of homemade quality. And for consumers, it made canned soup feel more satisfying, even when it was mostly water and salt. But in the late 20th century, MSG came under fire. Reports of headaches, nausea, and a mysterious collection of symptoms dubbed Chinese restaurant syndrome led to widespread concern. While scientific studies later found no definitive link between MSG and health issues for most people, the damage was done. By the 1990s, food companies started reducing MSG levels and slapping "No MSG" labels on their products. In the 1970s, plastic was the future. It was lightweight, shatterproof, and perfect for everything from food storage to baby bottles. Parents heated up formula in plastic bottles without a second thought, and leftovers were stored in sturdy, reusable containers. What no one realized was that many of these plastics contained BPA, bisphenol A, a chemical that would later become one of the most controversial additives in food packaging history. BPA was used to make plastic stronger and more durable, and it did its job well. The problem? It didn't just stay in the plastic. When exposed to heat, like in a microwave, dishwasher, or even just warm baby formula, it could leach into food and drinks. By the late 20th century, scientists started studying its effects, linking it to potential hormonal disruptions and developmental issues in children. The public backlash came fast. By the 2000s, consumer pressure pushed many companies to phase out BPA in baby products, and in 2012, the FDA banned it from baby bottles and sippy cups. Today, BPA-free is a major selling point, but back in the 70s, no one thought twice about it. For much of the 20th century, liver and onions wasn't just a meal, it was practically a dietary requirement. Packed with iron, protein, and vitamins, liver was considered a superfood long before the term even existed. Parents fed it to their kids, doctors recommended it for anemia, and budget-conscious families relied on it as a cheap, nutritious staple. In some households, it showed up on the dinner table multiple times a week, fried up with onions and served alongside mashed potatoes or rice. The preparation was simple. Soak the liver in milk to mellow out the strong metallic taste, dredge it in flour, and fry it in a sizzling pan. The onions helped mask the intense flavor, but for many kids, no amount of onions could make it more appealing. Complaints were met with the usual response: "It's good for you." But as nutrition science advanced, concerns grew over excessive vitamin A intake, especially from beef liver. Too much could lead to toxicity, causing dizziness, bone issues, and even birth defects in pregnant women. By the 1990s, liver's reputation faded, and dietary guidelines recommended eating it in moderation. Teen parties in the 1970s were a little different from today. There were no viral videos, no social media evidence, just loud music, questionable fashion choices, and in some cases, a tray of brightly colored gelatin shots hidden in the fridge. These boozy little treats, made by mixing flavored gelatin with hard liquor, were a sneaky way for underage drinkers to bypass the telltale scent of alcohol. If a parent walked by, they just looked like an innocent dessert. The concept was simple. Boil water, stir in a packet of gelatin, and instead of cold water, add vodka, rum, or whatever was on hand. Pour it into small cups, let it set, and within a few hours, the party had a new centerpiece. The appeal? They were easy to make, easy to eat, and for inexperienced drinkers, easy to underestimate. While underage drinking was nothing new, the rise of gelatin shots added an extra layer of risk. The alcohol wasn't diluted in a cocktail. It was concentrated in a sweet, jiggly form that went down too easily. By the 1980s, stricter laws on underage drinking and alcohol enforcement made these party staples less common. In the 1970s, deep frying wasn't just a cooking method, it was a way of life. Fried chicken, onion rings, French fries. If it could be battered, it was dropped into a pot of sizzling oil. And that oil? It wasn't changed nearly as often as you'd think. Whether in diners, fast food kitchens, or even home deep fryers, the same batch of oil was often used for days, sometimes weeks, getting darker and thicker with every batch. Reusing oil wasn't just about saving money, it was considered part of the flavor. Each round of frying added something extra, building up that unmistakable, seasoned taste. Some cooks swore by it, claiming that fresh oil just didn't have the same depth. If the fryer got too low, they simply topped it off with new oil and kept going. But over time, health concerns started bubbling up. Studies showed that repeatedly heating oil at high temperatures could break it down, creating harmful compounds linked to heart disease and even cancer. Old oil could also harbor rancid fats and trans fats, both of which became dietary villains in the late 20th century. Pork cassoulet was what you went for as far as everyday meals go if you wanted to work some pork into the weekly diet. Pork cassoulet featured pork shoulders, or sausages in particular, and some of the typical ingredients you're used to seeing with savory dishes. Tomatoes, onions, garlic, all your usual suspects. Except this time it uses white beans like Great Northern beans. The reason you ended a crock pot, particularly for this, is that it is a stew, and the pork needs to be browned. Now you can include breadcrumbs for a crunch on top, but it kind of messes with the stew-centric vibe, so people used to leave them out. As far as the flavor goes, this is all savory, and it does not hide that fact from you at all. The slow cooking really lets everything combine into one massive profile that feels like it's made up of many different flavors, instead of a lot of tastes fighting for which one gets to stand out the most. When this was popular, pork was leagues more affordable than it is today, and the fact that you could either make this into a stew or a casserole meant that a lot of families found a lot of use for it. It fit the tastes of almost every prolific area in the country, like California, the Pacific, or the South, and it did great at keeping everyone full. Super elastic bubble plastic was the stuff of legends, a whimsical toy that allowed children to create their own colorful, air-filled bubbles. Yet, beneath its vibrant allure lay hidden risks. The chemical composition of the plastic and the inhalation required to blow the bubbles raised health concerns, highlighting the complex balance between innovative play and safety. While captivating in its simplicity and creativity, Super Elastic Bubble Plastic's journey underscores the ongoing dialogue about the materials and methods used in toys, a conversation that continues to shape the landscape of play. Speaking of traditions, one long-held custom in upper society and luxury cuisine was beluga caviar, as you may have heard. The USA had an infamously high appetite for it, consuming around 60% of the world's caviar. But that meant that, like sharks, beluga sturgeons were not safe in their own waters. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had to ban the buying or selling of any beluga products, as the fish today faces a serious threat of extinction because of overfishing. It might be tasty, but there's certainly no need to fish enough of them to wipe their entire gene pool clean. At least we think that's the sane take. Caviar is still one of the most widely consumed luxury cuisines in America, but beluga caviar has been effectively banned from mass production. Who knows? Maybe one day the rest of the caviar varieties may suffer the same fate. We are still continuing the Meat Express because next on the list is Salisbury steak. Dietitian James Salisbury invented the steaks to help out with increased digestive issues and illnesses that were spreading rapidly in the U.S. The now dinner staple, Salisbury steak, involved a hamburger patty and was mostly known to be a steak with high-quality beef and gravies. The healthy aspect was ensured by keeping the gravies homemade and the beef clean. The Salisbury steak started losing customers as illnesses started to decrease in the populace. As a result, lots of restaurants stopped serving it regularly. However, now it is returning. Whether that is due to digestive issues coming back with it or a growing love for the vintage, you can find this at American Steak much more commonly now. So you know how America and pulled pork go together like jam on toast, right? After all, it's something you can feed a whole crowd and have them feeling full and satisfied. It's a showstopper, but you can make a lot of easy things with it. Most dishes you can make and serve will have people asking you what your recipe is, but that's just how easy pulled pork is to work with. So, when I say this next sentence, hear it with an open mind. How do you feel about cherry cola pulled pork? Yeah, slow-cooked, barbecue-y, savory pulled pork left to simmer in a pool of cherry cola, barbecue sauce, and other seasonings. The first time I heard of this dish, I struggled just to imagine all of those flavors in one bite. Like, barbecue sauce is a dip, pulled pork is a main dish, and cherry cola is a drink. You're used to having all that separately, right? Despite that, since it was all made from things that were so readily available in most homes, and since it was right up the alley of home chefs in their slow-cooking era, it took off in a major way. Especially in the South, where everything involved in this dish is something people were already having on a daily basis. Barbie Rollerblade, a toy that sparkled with the promise of fun, took a sharp turn towards safety concerns in 1992. These dolls, equipped with rollerblades that emitted real sparks, captured the imagination of many until the potential fire hazard they posed came to light. The recall of Barbie rollerblade skates underscored the complexities of integrating dynamic features into toys and the paramount importance of thorough safety testing. This incident not only highlighted the challenges of innovation in toy design, but also reinforced the enduring commitment to safeguarding the joy and well-being of children. Another delicacy that is native to West Africa is ackee fruit, which in Jamaica is a widely consumed treat and is even their national fruit, but in America is currently banned by the FDA. This is all because ackee fruit, as tasty and soft as it can be, contains hypoglycin, which is a toxin that can cause an allergic reaction you really would not see coming. Let's just say it feels like one of the worst hangovers of your life, and that may be why the sickness caused by ackee fruit has a name. In the world of medicine, it is lovingly referred to as Jamaican vomiting sickness, but do not let pretenses fool you. If too much of it is consumed when it is very ripe, the fruit can very well be fatal. Hence why there's such a tight ban on it. Another dish just as beloved as the last is sweet and sour pork. This Cantonese dish found its way into the hearts and bellies of Americans with ease in the 19th century. We have early Chinese migrants to thank for the introduction of sweet and sour pork. In America, it is a lot different than the traditional version. You would get small cubed pork alongside diced bell pepper and rice, and a lot of ketchup. This is the version that made its home in the kitchens of Americans everywhere. It exploded in popularity as a guaranteed item on the menu of mom-and-pop joints. Much like other foods on this list, sweet and sour pork faced a hiccup when it temporarily disappeared from restaurants due to the introduction of newer, fancier variations of pork. The demand for this classic dish never went down, and eventually, restaurants were inclined to bring it back. If we take a look at how porcupine meatballs made their claim to fame, then the answer is pretty easy, my friend. You take canned food, a sauce that gets simplified for everyday use, and budget-friendly, high-quality meatballs, and you have an easy winner in the eyes of the people. This dish costs nothing to make and requires the simplest of things from you. It's probably all stuff you already have in your home, to be honest. How often do we really find ourselves without any onions or rice? The sauce might be a bit tricky if you're new to it, but any canned tomato sauce would work too. All in all, it's extremely beginner-friendly. It caught on because between the casseroles, the meatloafs, and the pot roasts, people needed something different, but similar enough that it could work for them on a daily basis. What they ended up finding was porcupine meatballs, among many things, but the recipe is largely forgotten nowadays. You just don't get to see it being made much in households, probably because the prices are much higher than they used to be, and because there's been a massive rise in takeout culture on top of it all. Its golden days in the 1950s and 1970s are ancient history now. The Easy Bake Oven, a beloved toy since 1963, found itself under scrutiny in 2007. Known for allowing children to craft their own culinary creations, this seemingly harmless device led to an unexpected danger. Reports of children getting their fingers stuck, with some cases resulting in burns severe enough to necessitate surgery, prompted a massive recall of approximately 1 million units. This incident served as a stark reminder of the evolving understanding of toy safety, leading to a redesigned Easy Bake Oven that prioritized accessibility and safety, ensuring that future chefs could bake without fear. Casu Marzu, luckily, was not an animal species that was almost wiped out, but a vintage Italian cheese that involved sheep's milk, which was heated and then curdled for 3 weeks. Now this gave it one hell of a flavor, and a sensation that other cheese just could not hold a candle to, but the process was beyond icky. Within 3 weeks of curdling, flies would be drawn to the milk and they would bombard it with their eggs, naturally turning into maggots. The maggots would then eat the milk, which had rotted a fair bit by now, and then let out some kind of substance that gave Casu Marzu its fame. For a lot of people, this might be too much, and that's definitely a fair hill to die on. Luckily, the government is one of those groups, and it banned this cheese for not meeting health standards. Remember Hormel? Connoisseurs of canned cuisine? They brought corned beef hash to the States in around the 1970s. This hearty breakfast dish has survived the tests of time, as it would be discontinued then brought back almost instantaneously, until the beef hash found a permanent place in American cuisine. The food has ties to WW2, as it was a lot more popular back then to eat canned options or packaged food. Beef hash was particularly well-liked because meat was hard to come by at the time. Fresh meat in particular was always rationed immediately. This made Hormel products a must-buy for people back in the day. While hash has been around in America for even longer, it became really popular in the 40s. Though in the post-war era, it did fall off in popularity, urging the company to discontinue the product. Beef hash made a comeback in the 70s when inflation hit, as people were looking for cheaper alternatives. Since then, this dish has slowly been making a return to many restaurants these days, especially as a cheap takeout option. Plus, this was a dish that really got the crowd singing, and that's always one you want to keep on your roster. This dish actually got popular for exactly the reasons you would think. Yes, landing your man through a happy stomach is a good way to get married by fall season. Land your man, baked beans suddenly are a tried and tested method. I mean, you don't get a moniker like that for nothing, right? These typically get served as a topping for bratwurst or hot dogs, or served as a side for a main event that lies more on the barbecue side. The beans are made with ground beef, onions, and bell peppers, so they definitely are the perfect side to any kind of savory or tangy experience. One of the best sauces to use was Texas Pete sauce, but any kind of Tabasco works. If you have hardwood smoked bacon, though, that's definitely what cookbooks recommend, along with Taco Bell seasoning. As far as beans, any kind of canned beans work, but if you're looking for a specific recommendation that really encapsulates that mid-1900s flavor profile, then you should go for Bush's original baked beans. Either way, you're in for a great time with these. Try making them for a special someone on a romantic evening, and maybe you might get lucky in other ways too. If you do hear wedding bells because of this dish, know you did a great job. Then, the tale of the Cabbage Patch Kids Snack Time Kids dolls, a late 90s sensation, brings a modern twist to our nostalgic journey. These dolls, designed to eat snacks fed by their young owners, captured hearts until an unforeseen hazard emerged. The mechanism that enabled this unique feature also posed a risk of entangling children's fingers and hair, leading to a recall in 1997. This incident highlights the ongoing challenges faced by toy manufacturers and regulators in ensuring the safety of innovative toys, a reminder of the delicate balance between creativity and caution in the world of children's playthings. Nobody can go without margarine, the all-time quintessential breakfast food that everyone from everywhere both in and out of the US can agree on. One of the more relaxing parts of spreading big dabs of margarine on your toast is knowing that it is not really bad for you, and that should be the case by all means until you add trans fats in. These fats would be put into the spread, and this was an industry-wide practice until it got banned by the FDA as it became linked to heart disease and diabetes. In particularly extreme cases, it puts you at a higher risk for cancer, and that is just too much trouble for butter of all things. How could we forget eggnog, a holiday favorite that has been a part of American cuisine for a long while? To anyone who has ever had any fond Christmas memories, it simply is not the holiday season until it is eggnog time. Americans love eggnog for its spicy notes and using some of their favorite ingredients. Stuff like rum, milk, and eggs are in the heart of any real U.S. citizen. It is surprising that a dish only made a year can last so long. Eggnog never got discontinued because their recipe was available to everyone at all times. The same fate cannot be told about companies that tried to sell bottled eggnog in the off-brand season. Many milk plants produced packaged eggnog to sell in seasons outside for Christmas, but due to lack of sales, these operations would often immediately shut down. Less and less people would find eggnog in markets once Christmas was over. Fortunately, a few milk processing facilities decided to resume year-round production of eggnog, albeit on a small scale. This allowed for true eggnog lovers to find this packaged drink in specialty stores and in limited locations. We're going to continue the casserole show with Alpine Chicken. This one got popular for more or less the same reasons the other two did. However, it had an extra kick that they didn't, and that was the addition of Swiss cheese. Americans will never get tired of a dish if it has a decent helping of cheese in it. So you shouldn't be too surprised that this is stuck in the minds of eaters and families like glue. Alpine chicken typically uses cream of mushroom soup and breadcrumbs or a stuffing mix layered in a dish that gets cooked until the cheese is melted. You also have your typical chicken breasts involved, but some people go for the thighs. It peaked in popularity during the post-war era when people really started looking for more ease in their cooking rather than sweating buckets after a day in the kitchen. You know how when you cook something, you rarely feel like eating it immediately? It's because cooking is a soul-sucking endeavor. It doesn't have to be, thanks to things like crock pots and recipes like Alpine Chicken, which bring the fun back in food and make sure you actually get to rest and replenish that stamina tank. Enter the Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Laboratory, the pinnacle of educational toys with a twist of danger, available briefly before its discontinuation in 1952. Promising to unlock the mysteries of atomic energy for curious minds, this set included actual radioactive materials. Safety concerns quickly overshadowed its educational value as the potential for harmful exposure became apparent. This bold foray into hands-on science education left its mark as a cautionary tale of ambition outpacing safety, illustrating a pivotal moment in the evolution of consumer awareness and regulation. In the 70s, the phrase, "let's get some shark fin soup," was not really that out of pocket. A lot of people enjoyed bowls of this at many restaurants across the USA, but local shark populations had to pay the price in a pretty nasty way as they got their fins removed and then were left in the ocean. While they were a tradition in some cultures, their use was not nearly as intense as the businesses constantly asking for more fins. Eventually, the Senate passed the Shark Fins Elimination Act, which, thankfully, now makes shark fin products illegal. Over the years, the constant efforts by hunters and other people looking to make a quick paycheck have endangered species, and today the number of sharks is at a record low. We also had chicken Marbella, which rivaled beef options like beef hash. Americans have always enjoyed an incredible variety of food. Popular American chefs Julie Rosso and Sheila Lukens popularized and invented chicken Marbella, a dish made using chicken, prunes, olives, and capers. The recipe was first seen in the Silver Palette cookbook. The cookbook recipe was very popular in the Jewish community and quickly became popular amongst larger groups of people across America. Towards the 80s, chefs across the country decided that the chicken Marbella needed a revamp. This decision would prove costly as people started disapproving of the dish when chefs added sun-dried tomatoes instead of olives. Clearly, they went a bit overboard, and people began to refrain from ordering the chicken Marbella. In a frenzy, dinner joints had to remove the chicken Marbella from the menu until they could go back to the original recipe. Since then, restaurants have stuck to the OG flavor more keenly. As far as everyday meals go, it gets pretty hard to outdo candied carrots if you're a middle-class home in the mid-1900s. As I'm sure many of you can relate to today as well, the little goblin in your brain that demands a sugar rush every other day for comfort is something humans throughout time have experienced. How did they get their fix? Well, you couldn't just get a caramel mocha frap from Starbucks like today, but you could take some carrots, boil them, and coat them in a glaze that was made from honey, maple syrup, brown sugar, and butter. Not really something that would suit the tastes of today, right? But don't knock it until you try it, because it actually did really well. Candied food was this entire niche genre of cooking back then that got popular. The whole glaze aspect was something people loved applying to every dish to see what sticks. These were a side dish that also worked for kids, so they got a lot of mileage out of family gatherings and dinner parties. But even besides that, it's still a great way to work some carrots into your diet. As far as the taste goes, they definitely hit home. It feels like any other treat you'd be eating, though when we think of candy today, we might be more used to hard and mushy textures like in hard licorice or sour candies. This was tender though, and it would melt in your mouth. The saga of lawn darts, or jarts, as they were colloquially known, is a somber chapter in toy history. Introduced in the 1960s, these metal-tipped darts, intended for outdoor play, soon revealed a darker side. After causing numerous injuries and tragically fatalities, lawn darts were banned in 1988 in the United States. This ban served as a watershed moment in toy safety, illustrating the critical need for oversight and regulation in children's playthings. The story of lawn darts remains a powerful reminder of the responsibilities manufacturers and regulators bear in ensuring the well-being of young enthusiasts. Jell-O Gelatin is a pretty tasty treat for an even better price for those who remember it. But did you know how many artificial sweeteners and harmful dyes were loaded in this one? If the past few names on the list were bad to you, then this might cause you to stop and think for a bit. A lot of additional stuff used in the gelatin, especially lots of food dyes for its various different flavors, were pretty harmful and caused skin issues as well as bloating, stomach discomfort, and nausea. With the way people consumed them, these otherwise lighter symptoms spiraled out to the point where long-term, people's immune systems were going down the drain. This made them vulnerable to a lot more than just one specific type of health nightmare. Luckily, there was a push for gelatin products with no food dyes in the market, and brands like Kroger responded with new lines of Jell-O without all the worrisome fake stuff. Chicken Roulade came to the United States through a French cookbook called Le Cuisinier Gascon. This book has the earliest traceable recipe of the iconic chicken roulade. Yet another poultry dish, the chicken roulade is made using chicken breasts that are stuffed with various fillings like spinach, cheese, or ham. The chicken is then baked until it is ready to eat. Chicken roulade was a famous entree at restaurants back in the day until chefs started to come up with newer and improved chicken main courses. This caused traditional recipes like chicken roulade to get sidelined and eventually discontinued. It experienced a comeback in 2005 when many cooking blogs rediscovered the traditional French dish. This caused several French restaurants across the states to bring this classic food back. Despite what you might think about chicken cacciatore, it's actually not hard at all. This was renowned as a one-pot meal, basically, the kind of thing you only need to pay minimal attention to. Italian-American cuisine is yet again the star of the show this time. And the interest in food like this was something America really only went through during the post-war period and towards the 70s and 80s. There was this growing national interest in foreign cuisines from the world over. I'm talking the deepest reaches of Mexico and Spain to Italian classics like this one, which you'd normally never even think to fight in an American home. However, dishes like these work so well with the average American's palate that it's a wonder you don't see them. Chicken pieces that get browned and simmered with tomatoes, bell peppers, garlic, and sometimes even wine. Slow cooked until you get a rich, thick sauce and chicken that needs barely any seasoning because it's already oozing with flavor. Simple ingredients, a no-fuss cooking method, and a taste that works for every chicken fan. It's not hard to see how this dish got to where it is, and now, chicken cacciatore is something you regularly find at almost any meat-based restaurant. Way to come from humble beginnings, right? The Battlestar Galactica Colonial Viper missile toy, a marvel of the late 70s, brought the excitement of space battles to Earth. However, the small missile parts, designed to launch from the toy, became a source of grave concern following a choking incident that tragically ended in a child's death. This event in 1978 led to a swift recall and served as a critical lesson in the design and safety of toys with small detachable parts. It underscored the importance of foreseeing potential risks in toy design, ultimately influencing stricter safety standards and practices in the toy industry, ensuring that the imagination's flight does not come at the cost of safety. Sassafras trees are deeply cherished cultural items because of their solace in the symbolism of many cultures, as well as the infamous sassafras tea that we keep hearing people raving about. A cup of this in the 70s was all you needed to fix your soul and wipe away the exhaustion of last week. However, the tree and tea itself may not be so healthy. The tea at least contains a carcinogen called safrole, which is found in large amounts in the tea, thereby making it pretty unsafe as well as a bad idea if you have any pre-existing breathing problems. Besides, some studies found that the root bark of the tree and the oil it secretes can be linked to cancer or liver damage. Maybe we should reevaluate how healthy this piece of foliage is? Chicken croquettes were the heart and soul of road stop diners everywhere. You could always stop in any state for these breaded and fried chicken patties and they'd be served. Croquettes took off especially around the 1920s. That can explain why people may see them as old-fashioned now. Still, they have been regular for Americans for a long while. It was included in American cookbooks like The Virginia Housewife and Directions for Cookery. That is definitely a testament to its popularity. Chicken croquettes lost their popularity commercially, however, as many roadside stalls and restaurants stopped serving them. As processed and frozen food became common, the snack made a triumphant return as frozen food. Gourmet croquettes also started showing up at newer, trendy restaurants, suggesting a comeback of this beloved food to the States. Osso Bucco is something that's known for smoothness. The way the meat falls off of the bone, the saltiness of the gremolata, the freshness of that first bite, which is an experience that you have to savor all on its own. If you're like one of those people who loves to try out your local Italian-American cuisine, you'd be doing yourself one hell of an injustice by not ever trying this. The way this dish got popular was because while the dish was originally made only with veal, by the time it hit American soil, it was using substitutes like beef or pork shanks. This made the dish accessible for your everyday Joe who can't afford to spend a lot on vegetables because, bills. Plus, if you add some gremolata, which is a mix of lemon zest, garlic, and parsley, to the dish, then you get a pretty balanced set of flavors that bounce off of each other. This is one of the finest parts of Italian-American cuisine, and it got popular for being a wonderful family meal that can keep everyone content and full. This trend of exhausting an entire populations of animals for culinary thrills had spread to a lot more than just life beneath the sea. An example is foie gras, which was created by having ducks and geese go through a rather harmful diet of corn. To the point, they were force-fed the corn to ensure that they were fattened up properly. The damage this did to their livers cannot be stated in simple words, but the livers were the main part, so the market saw no reason to stop its routines. California was one of the first states to step up about it and ban this activity, even though the move got backlash. But even the Supreme Court rejected a case for removing the ban. Hopefully, the rest of the country takes a hint too, because the act of foie gras is quite unethical. Fortunately, most states have now banned force-fed and harmful diets for animals and thus automatically deemed foie gras illegal. By the 1990s, regulations forced restaurants to follow stricter guidelines, and home cooks became more cautious. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments if you remember eating any of these foods.